evening, dear wanderer through the corridors of time. Welcome, truly and deeply welcome, to the Whispers of Time channel. I am so profoundly grateful that you found your way here tonight, to this gentle sanctuary where the relentless noise of the modern world finally falls silent, where time itself becomes something fluid and negotiable rather than the rigid taskmaster that drives your days, where you can step completely outside your present moment with all its demands and worries, and step into something so distant, so different, so utterly removed from everything you know that the transformation itself becomes a kind of healing, a kind of medicine for a soul that's been carrying too much for too long. Perhaps today has been overwhelming in ways you can't even articulate. Perhaps you've been holding tension in your shoulders without even realizing it, clenching your jaw without awareness, breathing shallowly from your chest rather than deeply from your belly, existing in a state of low-level stress that's become so normal you don't even recognize it as stress anymore, just as the background condition of your life. Perhaps your mind has been racing in endless loops, replaying conversations, planning for tomorrow, worrying about next week and next month and next year, solving problems that haven't even occurred yet, rehearsing scenarios that will never actually happen, trapped in the prison of your own thoughts with no key to unlock the door, and step into the simple peace of just being present, just existing, just breathing in this moment without the weight of past and future crushing down on you. Tonight, we're going somewhere that will teach you something profound about what it means to be human, about how people have lived and suffered and endured and found meaning throughout most of human history, about a relationship with hardship and work and poverty that's completely foreign to modern sensibilities, yet that sustained our species for thousands of years. We're traveling backward through time, not just decades or centuries, but more than 2,000 years, all the way to ancient China during the Han Dynasty, to a period when the foundations of Chinese civilization were being solidified, when Confucian philosophy was shaping social structures that would persist for millennia, when the Silk Road was beginning to connect East and West, when great achievements in art and science and governance were occurring in the courts of emperors and the studios of scholars. But we're not going to visit those courts or those studios. We're not going to witness the grand events that get recorded in history books and studied by scholars. We're going to experience something much more fundamental, much more real in terms of actual human experience. We're stepping into the daily life of a peasant farmer, one of the countless millions who formed the base of the social pyramid, whose labor made everything else possible, who fed the empire and paid the taxes and did the work without which no emperors could rule and no scholars could study and no artists could create. This person we'll follow has no name that history records, lived in a village whose name has been forgotten, died, and was buried and decomposed back into the earth without leaving any trace except perhaps a few broken pottery shards, and the continuation of the family line through children who survived to have children of their own. This is not a story about great deeds or heroic achievements. This is a story about the ordinary heroism of simply surviving, simply continuing to exist day after day, year after year, generation after generation, under conditions that would break many modern people within weeks. Life for a peasant farmer in Han Dynasty, China, was hard in ways that are difficult for us to truly comprehend from our position of modern comfort and security. This was a life defined by poverty that went beyond not having luxuries, beyond even not having basic comforts. This was poverty that meant being one bad harvest away from starvation, one serious illness or injury away from complete destitution, one series of unfortunate events away from death, not as an abstract future possibility, but as an immediate present threat. The average peasant family owned almost nothing, a small earthen house that was barely more than a shelter against weather, a few simple tools for farming, some basic cooking implements, perhaps a change of clothing if they were fortunate, almost no furniture beyond perhaps a few low stools, nothing decorative or beautiful or frivolous, every possession purely functional, kept only because it served survival. The work was endless, brutal, repetitive, exhausting. A peasant farmer worked from before dawn until after dark during planting and harvest seasons. And even during slower winter months, there were always tasks: maintaining tools and equipment, repairing irrigation channels, collecting fuel, preparing for the next planting season. The work was physical in ways that destroyed bodies over time. Backs bent from decades of hoeing and planting, hands gnarled with arthritis from constant use, joints worn out from repetitive motions, skin weathered and aged by constant exposure to sun and wind and cold. A 30-year-old peasant might look 50 by modern standards, worn down by labor and poor nutrition and the accumulated toll of a hard life. The food was monotonous to the point of being almost unimaginable to modern people accustomed to variety and choice. For peasants in northern China during the Han Dynasty, the staple food was millet, a grain that's hardy and reliable, that grows in relatively poor soil, and with limited water, that can be stored for months if kept dry. But that offers almost no variety in flavor or preparation. Millet porridge for breakfast, millet porridge for lunch, millet porridge for dinner, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Occasionally, there might be some pickled vegetables if the family had time and resources to prepare them during harvest season. Very rarely, there might be some meat if an animal was slaughtered or if game was successfully hunted. But mostly, it was millet, cooked in water, seasoned with nothing, or perhaps a tiny pinch of salt if the family had any, eaten not for pleasure, but purely for fuel, for the calories needed to continue the work that would allow survival to continue another day. Yet despite all this hardship, despite the poverty and the endless work, and the monotonous food, and the constant vulnerability to disaster. These people found ways to create meaning and maintain dignity and experience moments of genuine peace and even happiness. They developed elaborate rituals for honoring ancestors, creating connections to the past and the future that made individual suffering feel less arbitrary, less meaningless. They told stories around fires in the evening, maintaining oral traditions that carried culture forward across generations without need for writing or formal education. They celebrated festivals that marked the agricultural calendar, rare opportunities for rest and better food and community gathering, and the small pleasures that made harsh lives bearable. They formed tight family bonds, understanding that survival depended on cooperation, that alone they would perish, but together they could endure. And they experienced something that we've largely lost in our modern world of artificial light and constant stimulation and endless entertainment options. They experienced genuine rest after genuine exhaustion, the profound peace that comes when a body that has worked to its limits finally stops and can simply be still, when hunger is met by food, however simple, when cold is met by warmth, however basic, when the day's work is done, and sleep arrives not as something you have to try to achieve, but as something that simply claims you, pulling you down into deep unconsciousness from which you emerge hours later restored and ready to begin again. Tonight, as you lie in your comfortable bed with your soft mattress and your warm blankets and your climate-controlled room and your full stomach and your safety and security, you're going to experience through imagination what it was like to live without all those things, to exist in a state of constant physical discomfort and vulnerability, and yet to find within that existence moments of peace and meaning that are no less real for occurring in harsh conditions. You're going to understand something about the human capacity for endurance, for finding hope in hopeless situations, for creating beauty and meaning even in poverty, for continuing to choose life even when life offers little comfort. So let your breathing slow now, deeply and completely slow. Let your body release all the tension it's been holding, all the tightness in your shoulders and jaw and stomach, all the bracing against threats that aren't actually present. Let your mind release its grip on all the thoughts that have been circling endlessly, all the worries about tomorrow, all the regrets about yesterday, all the analysis and planning and rehearsing and ruminating. Let yourself simply be here, now, in this moment, in this bed, in this room, breathing in and breathing out, allowing everything else to fade into the background. And before we begin our journey to ancient China, before we step into that peasant farmer's life and walk through a day that was lived more than 2,000 years ago by someone whose name has been lost, but whose humanity connects them to us across all that time, I have one small request. If this is the kind of peace you've been seeking, if these journeys into the past help you escape the relentless present, if you want to return tomorrow night and the night after that to other stories that will carry you gently into sleep, please take just one moment now, while you're still awake enough to move your hand, while your eyes can still focus on the screen, to tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'll be here waiting for you tomorrow evening at exactly this same time. Same gentle voice, same refuge from chaos, same doorway into peaceful sleep. Most people drift away into sleep within the first few minutes of these stories, so do it now before that happens. One simple tap, and I promise we'll meet again tomorrow night. And every night you need this escape. Now then, close your eyes completely if they're not already closed. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever supports you. Feel gravity pulling gently, but insistently. Feel yourself becoming heavier, more relaxed, more at peace with simply existing in this moment without needing to do anything or be anything or achieve anything. Feel yourself beginning to drift backward through time like a leaf floating on a river current, moving effortlessly through the years and decades and centuries, through all the ages of history, through the entire span of recorded civilization, back and back and back, until you arrive in a small village in northern China more than 2,000 years ago. In a moment just before dawn, when one person is about to wake and begin a day that will be much like yesterday and much like tomorrow, part of an endless cycle of work and rest that defines peasant existence. Let's begin our journey now to that village, to that small earthen house, to that person who is just now stirring in the darkness before dawn, preparing to face another day of hard labor and simple food and small moments of peace within an overall context of grinding poverty and constant vulnerability. Someone whose life we would consider unbearable, but who simply considers it life, the only life they've ever known, the only life they can imagine, accepting it not with resignation, but with a kind of deep, patient endurance that we've forgotten how to access in our modern world of comfort and complaint. The person wakes slowly in the pre-dawn darkness, consciousness returning gradually through layers, moving from the depths of sleep toward full awareness in stages that feel almost geological in their slowness, like tectonic plates shifting, like mountains rising from the Earth's crust over millennia, compressed into minutes. There's no alarm, no jarring awakening, no sudden transition from unconscious to conscious. Instead, there's a gentle rising through dreams that become lighter and less coherent, through a borderland state where awareness begins to return. But sleep still has its hooks in deep, through finally opening eyes to darkness so complete that there's no visual difference between eyes open and eyes closed. Orientation coming only from the sensation of lying on the heated sleeping platform, the warmth beneath, the cold air above, the presence of other breathing bodies nearby. The first sensation that penetrates the gradually awakening consciousness is temperature contrast, the warmth of the kang, the raised earthen sleeping platform with channels underneath through which smoke and heat from yesterday evening's cooking fire passed, warming the bricks, those bricks now radiating stored heat upward through the layers of quilted cotton padding that serve as bedding, creating an island of tolerable temperature in a house that's otherwise barely warmer than the frozen world outside. Below the waist, pressed against the warm platform, the body is comfortable, almost cozy. Above the waist, exposed to the house's interior air, there's cold, bitter cold, the kind of cold that makes breath visible even in darkness, that makes the idea of moving, of leaving this warm spot, almost unbearable. The second sensation is the presence of other bodies sharing this sleeping platform, this heated island of survival in the cold, dark sea of winter. The wife is pressed against one side, her body a source of additional warmth, her breathing deep and regular, still lost in sleep. On the other side are the children, 3 of them ranging in age from perhaps 8 years down to 3, all huddled together under the shared quilted padding, their small bodies generating surprising amounts of heat when clustered together, their breathing soft and peaceful. Near the edge of the platform is the elderly mother, the person's own mother, her breathing slightly labored with age, and with the chronic respiratory problems that come from a lifetime of breathing smoke from cooking fires. A soft wheezing that's become the soundtrack of every night, familiar and almost comforting in its consistency. The person lies still for a long moment, suspended between sleep and waking, between the warm comfort of rest and the cold, harsh reality of another day beginning. The body doesn't want to move, doesn't want to abandon this one area of comfort for the discomfort that waits. But the mind is already beginning to engage, already running through the day's planned tasks, already feeling the weight of responsibility that's constant and unavoidable. The fields need attention even in winter. The irrigation channels need maintaining. Stored tools need checking and repairing. Fuel needs to be collected for cooking fires. The endless cycle of work that keeps the family fed continues regardless of weather or desire or exhaustion. Outside the small house, the village is still completely silent, wrapped in darkness, so complete it seems almost solid, as if the night itself has weight and substance. There are no street lights, of course, no electrical lights of any kind, no lights at all except the faint glow of stars visible through cracks in the thatched roof, and through the small windows covered with oiled paper that admits some light during the day while keeping out the worst of the cold. The silence is profound in a way that modern people rarely experience. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no mechanical sounds of any kind, just the pure silence of a world powered entirely by human and animal muscle, where everything stops when darkness makes work impossible, where winter nights stretch long and cold and empty of activity. The person knows from long experience, from an internal clock calibrated by thousands of repetitions, that this is the coldest hour of the night, the period just before dawn when temperatures reach their minimum, when elderly people and small children sometimes simply don't wake up, their bodies having exhausted their capacity to maintain core temperature against the relentless cold, slipping away peacefully in sleep without struggle or apparent suffering. It's a death considered almost fortunate in its way, better than the lingering deaths from disease or starvation, better than the violent deaths from accidents or banditry or natural disaster. Simply going to sleep one night and not waking, joining the ancestors without pain or fear. But the person is in the prime of working life, perhaps 30 years of age, though looking closer to 40 or even 50 by modern standards, due to the accumulated wear of hard physical labor and limited nutrition and constant exposure to weather. The body is lean to the point of being gaunt. Every bit of excess fat burned away by insufficient caloric intake, combined with intense physical work, muscles ropey and hard, and visible beneath skin that's weathered and tough and darkened by sun exposure. The hands are remarkable, so calloused they're almost like leather, capable of grasping rough wooden tool handles and thorny plant stems, and even hot cooking pots without flinching. The calluses so thick they've almost eliminated sensitivity, transforming hands into working implements rather than organs of touch. The person finally sits up, the decision made, the transition from rest to work beginning. Moving slowly and carefully to avoid waking the others who need every possible moment of sleep they can get, who receive too little rest as it is. The person slides to the edge of the kang and lets legs dangle over the side, feet not yet touching the floor, preparing mentally for the shock of that contact. Then, inevitably, feet contact the packed earth floor, and the cold is shocking, genuinely painful, transmitted through tough calloused skin that usually feels little, but that still registers extreme temperature. The body's warning system activated, demanding immediate response. Moving quickly now, because movement generates heat and stillness allows cold to penetrate deeper. The person reaches for clothing that's been kept on the edge of the sleeping platform. Simple garments made from hemp fiber, coarse and rough against skin, but providing insulation. There's no separate sleep clothing, no nightshirt or pajamas, just the same clothes worn day and night, removed only when they need washing, which isn't often because water in winter is painfully cold, and heating enough water for laundering requires precious fuel. The tunic and pants go on over the underlayers that were worn to bed, then an outer padded jacket that's thin and much mendied, but still provides crucial additional insulation. Then cloth shoes with straw stuffing that wraps around feet and ties with strips of hemp cord. Even fully dressed, the cold is intense, penetrating, the kind of cold that settles into bones and joints and makes everything hurt, that makes breath painful in the lungs, that makes fingers and toes ache even while moving. This is normal, expected, simply the condition of winter in northern China for people whose homes are barely more than shelters against weather, who have no central heating, no furnaces, No thermostats, nothing but fires that provide localized warmth while they burn, and then fade to coals that provide minimal heat until rekindled in the morning. The small house is barely visible in the darkness, just one large room that serves all purposes: sleeping, cooking, eating, storage. Everything packed into perhaps 300 square feet of space. The walls are earthen, made from mud mixed with straw and formed into large bricks that were dried in the sun, stacked to create walls perhaps a foot thick, plastered over with more mud to fill gaps and create a relatively smooth surface. These walls provide some insulation, but are far from waterproof or airtight, allowing cold drafts to penetrate, allowing rain to gradually erode them, requiring constant maintenance and repair. The roof is thatched, made from bundles of dried millet stalks laid over a framework of poles, providing protection from direct rain and snow, but always allowing some penetration, always needing repair after storms, always harboring mice and insects that find shelter there. The floor is simply packed earth, the same soil that exists outside, but compressed by decades or centuries of foot traffic into a surface that's hard as concrete, but uneven and cold, with no covering, no rugs or mats, except the woven reed mats that are laid down during the day for sitting. The house is organized by function rather than by walls. There's the sleeping area with the raised kang platform, the cooking area in one corner with its fire pit and simple hearth, the storage area where grain is kept in large clay jars and tools are stored, all of it visible from everywhere else because there are no interior walls, no privacy, everyone aware of everyone else's activities at all times. The person moves carefully through the darkness toward the cooking area, knowing the path from thousands of repetitions, able to navigate without light, avoiding the scattered obstacles, the grain storage jars, the low stools, the baskets of tools, all the family's sparse possessions. The cooking fire from last night has burned down to a few small coals, barely visible even when the person bends close, but still alive, still containing heat that can be coaxed back into flames with patient effort. Small pieces of dried grass and thin twigs are added carefully, arranged to allow air circulation. The person's face close to the coals, blowing gently and steadily, directing oxygen onto the hottest spots, encouraging them to release their stored energy and ignite the new fuel. This process requires patience, requires understanding the delicate balance between enough oxygen to encourage combustion and too much that will cool the coals or scatter them. The person has done this every morning for years, has developed an intuitive understanding of fire that comes from necessity rather than study, knows exactly how hard to blow, exactly how much fuel to add at each stage, exactly when to be patient and when to be aggressive. Smoke begins to rise first, thin wisps that sting the eyes and make them water. Then suddenly a small flame appears, tentative and fragile, threatening to die, but growing stronger, catching on adjacent fuel spreading, becoming more confident, beginning to crackle and pop as trapped moisture vaporizes, finally establishing itself as a proper fire that can be built up with progressively larger pieces of fuel. The fuel itself is agricultural waste, almost entirely dried stalks of millet after the grain has been threshed away, dried grasses collected from roadsides and field margins, occasional pieces of wood if fallen branches can be found, but never trees cut specifically for fuel, because trees are far too valuable for that. Every bit of fuel has been gathered through labor, carried to the house, stored under shelter to keep it dry, carefully managed, because running out means cold and darkness and inability to cook food. The person adds fuel gradually, efficiently, knowing that careless use of too much means the supply might not last until spring, means possible suffering later to avoid mild discomfort now. As the fire grows, light begins to fill the small house, flickering and unsteady, creating moving shadows that make the space seem almost alive, animated by the dance of flames. And with light comes warmth, at first barely noticeable, then gradually more significant as the fire builds, radiating heat that pushes back against the cold that fills the house, creating a small sphere of tolerable temperature around the hearth, while the rest of the space remains frigid. The person's hands, extended toward the flames, begin to warm, the painful aching cold gradually replaced by tingling as circulation improves, fingers regaining some functionality and sensitivity. Water must be heated for the morning porridge that will be breakfast and possibly lunch, the same meal eaten day after day with almost no variation. The person moves to the large storage jar near the door, a clay vessel perhaps 3 feet tall, filled with water that was carried here yesterday from the village well or stream. Heavy work that's done daily, because water is essential and must be kept available. The water's surface is frozen, a thin layer of ice that must be broken, sharp pieces removed, the remaining water below still liquid but painfully cold. A smaller clay pot is filled from the large jar, water poured carefully to avoid spilling any, because every drop represents labor, carried from the source to this house on a shoulder pole, with buckets hanging from each end, balanced and heavy, and requiring strength and endurance. The pot is settled onto stones arranged around the fire, positioned so flames lick at its bottom and sides, beginning the slow process of heating. While waiting for the water to warm, the person measures out millet from the grain storage bin, a clay jar even larger than the water jar, filled with the hard, small yellow seeds that are the family's primary food source, their survival through winter depending entirely on this stored grain lasting until next harvest. The measure is careful, calculated, because the grain supply must stretch for months, and running out means starvation, not as a metaphor or exaggeration, but as a literal reality, death from malnutrition and lack of food, a fate that befalls tens of thousands of peasants in years of bad harvest. The amount taken is just enough for the family's breakfast, with nothing to spare, no margin for error. If someone is still hungry after eating their portion, there's no more to give them. The ration is what it is, determined by the calculations of how much exists and how long it must last. Mathematics of survival that allow no generosity or indulgence. The person adds the measured millet to the warming water, stirs it with a wooden paddle worn smooth by years of use, watches the hard seeds begin to absorb water and soften. The transformation from inedible pellets to digestible porridge happening slowly as heat works its magic on grain and water, while the porridge cooks, requiring only occasional stirring to prevent sticking and burning. The person steps outside briefly for morning necessities, pulling aside the cloth that covers the doorway, stepping into air that's even colder than inside, shocking in its intensity. The cold burns the lungs, makes eyes immediately water, creates visible plumes of breath that hang in the still air for long moments before dispersing. The darkness is slightly less complete now, the very first hints of pre-dawn light beginning to show in the eastern sky, the stars overhead still brilliant, but the ones near the horizon beginning to fade. The progression from night to day in its earliest stages. The person moves quickly to the area behind the house designated for human waste, simply a hole dug in the ground, periodically cleaned out. And the waste used to fertilize the fields, because nothing can be wasted. Every byproduct must serve a purpose, survival, depending on complete utilization of all resources, however unpleasant. The physical relief is immediate, but the cold is intense, making the person hurry, finishing quickly and returning to the relative warmth of the house and the fire that's now burning well, filling the space with flickering light and gradually increasing temperature. The village is beginning to stir now. Other early risers visible as dark shapes, moving in the dim pre-dawn light. Smoke beginning to rise from other houses as fires are rekindled. The sound of a rooster crowing somewhere, announcing the approaching dawn, even though the sun is still well below the horizon. The village consists of perhaps 40 or 50 small houses like this one, clustered together in a rough circle or square, surrounded by the fields that everyone works communally or individually, depending on the specific land tenure arrangements of this particular village. The houses are all similar earthen walls, thatched roofs, tiny windows, single rooms, minimal furnishings, the architecture of poverty that provides basic shelter and nothing more. The person returns to the cooking fire and checks the porridge, which is beginning to thicken as the millet absorbs water and swells, the hard seeds becoming soft, the mixture transforming from watery soup to thick porridge that will stick to the ribs, that will provide calories and energy for the morning's work. The taste is bland, almost neutral, with just a faint nuttiness from the millet itself. No seasoning except perhaps a tiny pinch of salt if the family has any. No sweetness, no spice, No variety at all. Just plain cooked grain eaten for nutrition rather than pleasure. The others are beginning to wake now on the sleeping platform, stirring and coughing and sitting up slowly, reluctant to leave the warm spot, but knowing that delay only makes the transition harder, that it's better to move quickly and generate heat through activity than to lie still and dread the inevitable. The wife is first up after the person, a woman perhaps 25 years old, but looking older, worn by childbearing and constant labor, her face lined and weathered, her hands rough and cracked despite her relatively young age. She moves with practiced efficiency, having performed these same morning routines for years, helping with the fire, adding more fuel, checking the porridge, beginning the endless domestic work that will fill her day from now until after dark. The children wake more slowly. The 8-year-old boy first, then the 6-year-old girl, then finally the 3-year-old boy, all of them thin and tough like their parents, wearing simple tunics made from scraps and hand-me-downs that have been patched so many times the original fabric is barely visible. Their faces show a seriousness beyond their years, an understanding that childhood is brief, and that they'll soon be expected to contribute real labor to the family's survival. That play and innocence are luxuries that poor families cannot afford to provide for long. They sit up on the sleeping platform, shivering in the cold air, waiting patiently for breakfast. Their silence and patience trained into them through years of discipline, and the understanding that complaining achieves nothing, that food comes when it comes and not before. The elderly mother is last to rise, moving slowly and carefully, joints stiff from cold and arthritis, back permanently bent from decades of field labor, hands so gnarled they struggle to grip things, but still present, still contributing what she can. Her primary value now being another person to help watch children and do light tasks, and her connection to the ancestors and the family's history, remembering stories and traditions that would otherwise be lost. She maneuvers herself off the sleeping platform with obvious pain, feet touching the cold floor, a soft grunt escaping as she straightens as much as she's able, reaching for a stick that serves as walking support, making her way slowly toward the fire and the promise of warmth. The family gathers around the fire as the porridge finishes cooking, sitting on low wooden stools or on the edge of the sleeping platform, a loose circle of faces illuminated by flickering flames, each face showing resignation and determination in equal measure, the expression of people who understand that life is hard, but who choose to continue anyway, because what other choice is there? The person ladles porridge into small clay bowls, one for each family member, the portions carefully equal though slightly smaller for the children, because their bodies require less fuel, and slightly larger for the adults who will do the hardest physical work. Each bowl is handed out with care, no words exchanged because none are needed. This ritual so familiar that it proceeds almost automatically. The porridge is eaten with simple wooden spoons, the surfaces worn smooth by years of use, some of them carved by the person during long winter evenings when there was nothing else to do. And fuel couldn't be spared for light to do more complex tasks. The taste is exactly what it always is: bland, slightly nutty, filling, but not satisfying. Fuel rather than pleasure, sustenance rather than enjoyment. The family eats in silence, focused on the food, aware of their hunger, aware that this might be all they get until evening, needing to eat every grain in their bowls because waste is unthinkable, because food represents survival and every spoonful matters. There's no conversation, no cheerful morning chatter, no discussion of plans or dreams or hopes, just quiet acceptance of another day beginning. The routine so established that it requires no acknowledgement or commentary. While the family eats, the elderly mother performs the morning ritual at the small household shrine that occupies a corner of the room. The shrine is simple, just a wooden shelf mounted to the wall, holding several wooden tablets on which names and characters are carved. Though no one in the family can read them, the meanings preserved through oral tradition, each tablet representing an ancestor, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, stretching back through generations. The family line made visible and tangible. The mother lights a stick of incense, cheap incense made from dried local plants, rather than the expensive imported varieties used by wealthy families, placing it in a small clay holder. The thin thread of smoke rising to carry prayers and offerings to the ancestors who watch over the family from the spirit realm. She bows 3 times, deep bows that make her old joints ache, murmuring prayers in a dialect so ancient and so distorted by time that even she barely understands the literal meanings of the words. Prayers learned from her own mother, who learned from her mother, passing down the forms even as the meanings become obscure. Specific words matter less than the act itself, the demonstration of respect and remembrance, the acknowledgement that the ancestors are real presences whose favor must be maintained and whose displeasure could bring misfortune. This ritual is not optional, not something done when convenient or when one feels particularly pious. It's essential, required, as necessary as eating or sleeping, because the family's survival depends not just on their own labor, but on the ancestors' protection and blessing. The relationship with ancestors is transactional, but also deeply emotional. The living provide offerings and honor and remembrance. The dead provide protection and guidance and blessings, both sides fulfilling their obligations in a cosmic bargain that spans the boundary between life and death. To neglect the ancestors would be not just disrespectful, but dangerous, potentially catastrophic, inviting illness or crop failure or accident or any of the 1,000 disasters that constantly threaten people living on the edge of survival, even in their poverty, even when food is scarce enough that people go to bed hungry. The family ensures that the ancestors receive their offerings of incense and prayers. And on festival days, Small portions of food are placed before the shrine before the family eats. Ancestors always honored first. After breakfast, as the first real daylight begins to seep through the small windows and the open doorway, the person prepares for the day's work in the fields, gathering the few simple tools that farming requires. A hoe with a wooden handle and iron blade, the blade much sharpened over years of use, wearing thin but still functional. The most valuable tool the family owns, protected carefully and repaired whenever possible, because replacing it would be almost impossible given their poverty. A bamboo shoulder pole for carrying loads, balanced on both ends. A woven basket made from willow branches, useful for countless tasks. A sickle for cutting plants. A simple wooden digging stick, fire-hardened at the tip. These simple implements, maintained carefully through constant attention and repair, are the means by which the family transforms labor into food, the interface between human effort and agricultural production. The wife is preparing for her own work, which in winter consists primarily of spinning and weaving, transforming raw hemp fiber into thread and cloth that will become clothing, or can be traded for other necessary goods. She settles at the simple spinning wheel that's been in the family for generations, its wooden parts worn smooth by countless hands, beginning the rhythmic work of drawing fiber and twisting it into thread, work that will occupy most of her day while the person is in the fields, work that's tedious and repetitive and time-consuming, but absolutely essential because clothing wears out constantly from hard use and must be replaced, and because textiles have value that can be exchanged for things the family cannot produce themselves. The children have their own tasks assigned according to their ages and capabilities. The 8-year-old boy will accompany his father to the fields today, continuing his education in the agricultural work that will define his entire adult life, learning through observation and practice the countless skills and techniques and pieces of knowledge that successful farming requires. The 6-year-old daughter will stay with her mother, helping with spinning and other household tasks, learning the domestic skills that will be her primary responsibilities when she's grown and married into another family. The 3-year-old will remain with grandmother, playing nearby while she does light work like sorting seeds or mending clothing. Too young yet for serious labor, but already absorbing through observation and imitation the behaviors and expectations that will shape his life. As the sun finally rises behind thick gray winter clouds, bringing dim daylight that marks the official beginning of the working day, the person and the oldest son set out for the fields, walking along the muddy path that connects the village to the agricultural land surrounding it. They're wearing all their warmest clothing, multiple layers of hemp tunics, padded outer jackets, cloth shoes stuffed with straw for insulation, cloth wrappings around their heads and faces, leaving only eyes exposed. But the cold still penetrates, still makes them shiver, still makes every movement slightly painful, as frozen joints protest being forced to work. The fields stretch in all directions from the village, bare and brown now in winter, the earth hard frozen, covered in patches with a dusting of snow. The previous year's crop cut and removed, leaving only stubble, the whole landscape looking dead and dormant. But it's not dead, just sleeping. And in a few months, when spring warmth arrives, this same land will explode with new growth, the cycle repeating as it has for thousands of years. The fundamental pattern of agricultural civilization in which humans have learned to work with nature's rhythms rather than against them. Planting when conditions are right, harvesting when crops are mature, resting when growth is impossible. Each season with its own characteristic work and challenges. The fields are divided into small plots through a complex system that has evolved over generations, balancing competing claims and trying to ensure some equity. Each family in the village having rights to several scattered strips rather than one large continuous plot. This scattering ensures that no one family gets exclusively the best or worst land. Everyone shares in the good soil and the poor soil, the well-drained areas and the patches that tend to stay wet, the plots close to the village and those farther away requiring longer walks. It's not the most efficient system in terms of agricultural productivity, but it's seen as fair, and fairness matters in a community where people must cooperate to survive, where resentment and conflict could be catastrophic. The person's family has rights to perhaps 15 mu of land total, roughly 2.5 acres, scattered across 6 different plots in various locations around the village's agricultural zone. This is enough to support the family in normal years if weather cooperates and harvests are good, barely enough, with little margin for error, leaving the family constantly vulnerable to misfortune. After paying taxes to the imperial government and rent to the landlord, who technically owns the land, the family typically keeps about 60% of what they grow, just enough to survive if nothing goes wrong. But any problem, bad weather, crop disease, pest infestation, injury that prevents work, can quickly cascade into catastrophe. Today's work is winter maintenance, preparation for spring planting still months away. The irrigation channels that bring water from the river to the fields need clearing of accumulated silt and debris. The earth dikes and dams that control water flow need inspection and repair. Field boundaries need attention. Stored tools need checking and fixing. It's not the dramatic, visible work of planting or the satisfying work of harvesting, but it's necessary work that prevents future problems, work that requires constant attention because neglect compounds, small issues becoming major disasters if left unaddressed. The person and son walk to the nearest of their plots, perhaps half a mile from the village, the path muddy despite the cold because winter rains have saturated the ground, making walking difficult. They pass other farmers heading to their own fields, brief nods exchanged, but no stopping to chat because time is precious and warmth requires constant movement. Standing still in this cold would quickly become dangerous. The mud sucks at their cloth shoes, making every step require extra effort. The accumulated weight of mud clinging to shoes adding to the exertion, requiring periodic stops to scrape it away using sticks or the edges of tools. Arriving at the plot, the person surveys it with eyes trained by years of experience, noting immediately where water has pooled and frozen, where erosion has occurred during autumn rains, where the field boundary has been disturbed possibly by animals or by encroachment from the neighboring plot. The work begins with clearing the drainage channel along one edge, using the hoe to scrape away silt and accumulated organic matter, the son helping by carrying removed material in the basket to areas where it can be used to fill low spots and level the field surface. The work is cold and wet and miserable, hands becoming numb within minutes despite constant movement, feet soaked from standing in partially frozen water, back aching from the bent position this work requires. But the person works steadily, methodically, with the patient endurance that characterizes peasant farmers everywhere, understanding that complaining achieves nothing, that the work must be done regardless of discomfort, that survival depends on maintaining these systems that allow agriculture to function. The son works alongside, learning not just specific techniques, but broader lessons about discipline and responsibility, and the acceptance of hardship that he'll need throughout his life. They work together in companionable silence, the father occasionally pointing out something, a place where the channel wall needs reinforcement, a technique for removing stubborn roots, the teaching happening through demonstration and brief comment rather than formal instruction. The sun climbs higher, though it remains hidden behind thick gray clouds, the light improving from dim to merely gloomy, making work easier but providing no warmth, the temperature remaining well below freezing. The person's internal clock, calibrated by thousands of repetitions, knows when midday approaches, when a brief break for food and rest is permitted though not truly desired, because stopping means losing the warmth generated by movement. They pause the work and move to the edge of the field, where a small stand of trees provides some wind protection, sitting on the cold ground because there's nowhere else to sit. Opening the cloth bundle brought from home that contains their midday meal. More millet porridge, the same as breakfast, but now cold and thick, congealed into a solid mass that's less appealing than when it was hot, but still food, still fuel. They eat in silence, father and son, conserving energy, watching other farmers in distant fields doing similar work. Understanding without need for discussion that everyone's struggle is essentially the same, that all peasant farmers face identical challenges and perform identical tasks in the endless cycle that has continued for generations and will continue for generations more. The work never truly finished, because completion of one season's tasks simply means the beginning of next season's obligations. After the brief rest, perhaps 15 minutes, no more, because sitting still in this cold quickly becomes dangerous. Hypothermia, a real risk. They return to work, moving now to a different task, inspecting and repairing the earth dam that holds irrigation water. This is heavier work, requiring moving large amounts of earth, piling it onto existing structures, packing it down to create watertight seals, making everything solid enough to withstand the pressure when spring irrigation begins. And water flows through these channels again. The person does most of the heavy lifting, while the sun helps with smaller loads, and with packing soil into gaps, learning through doing. His small body already beginning to adapt to the physical demands, muscles developing, calluses forming. The transformation from child to working adult happening gradually, but inexorably. As afternoon wanes and the already dim light begins to fade toward darkness, the person and son gather their tools and begin the walk back to the village. Both are exhausted, muscles aching, hands stiff and painful from cold and work, feet numb in wet shoes, but also feeling a certain satisfaction from having completed the day's planned tasks, from having made progress on the endless maintenance that farming requires. They walk slowly, conserving energy, the son occasionally needing to trot to keep up with his father's longer strides, neither speaking, because exhaustion makes conversation feel like too much effort. The village comes into view as they crest a small rise, smoke rising from every house as fires are built up for evening cooking. The scene both welcoming and melancholy, promising warmth and food, but also reminding them that tomorrow will bring more of the same work, and the day after, extending into a future that looks exactly like the past. They enter their small house to find the wife still at her spinning, the basket beside her now nearly full of thread, representing hours of patient repetitive work, her fingers moving automatically, while her mind has perhaps emptied into the meditative state that such work allows, finding a kind of peace in the rhythmic motions that require no thought, no decision, just endless repetition. The younger children are helping grandmother prepare the evening meal, the girl using a stone mortar to grind some dried vegetables that will be added to tonight's porridge, the 3-year-old playing with his one toy, a crude wooden figure carved by his father, representing a person or perhaps an animal. Interpretation depending on imagination. This single object serving as his entire world of play. Grandmother sits on her low stool near the fire, slowly mending a tunic, her gnarled fingers struggling with the needle, but persisting, understanding that these small contributions matter, that even elderly people must pull their weight if the family is to survive. The evening meal is nearly ready, the pot of porridge bubbling over the fire, the smell filling the small house, triggering automatic feelings of hunger even before tasting, the body's anticipation of finally receiving sustenance after a long day of hard labor. Tonight's porridge will be slightly different from breakfast. the wife has added some of the dried vegetables that were ground earlier, providing not just additional nutrition, but also some variety in flavor and texture that makes the meal feel more substantial, more like an occasion rather than simply fuel consumption. The family gathers around the fire for the evening meal, settling into their customary positions. The person and the oldest son closest to the fire having done the hardest work. The wife and daughters next. The grandmother and youngest child nearest the edge of the warm circle. Everyone waits patiently while the wife ladles porridge into bowls. The portions again carefully calculated, slightly larger tonight than at breakfast, because evening is when the main meal of the day occurs, when bodies that have been working all day need maximum refueling, when the family can afford to be slightly more generous because there's no more work ahead, just sleep. The porridge is eaten slowly, savored as much as such simple food can be savored, everyone aware of the luxury of having enough to eat, of not going to bed hungry tonight. The dried vegetables add a slight sourness, a complexity to the otherwise bland millet, tiny bits of texture that make the eating experience more interesting. There's even a tiny amount of oil mixed in, precious oil pressed from seeds, used sparingly because it's expensive and must be saved, but adding a richness and satisfying quality that plain boiled millet lacks. As the family eats, conversation begins, hesitant at first, then flowing more easily as stomachs fill, and the day's exhaustion begins to ease slightly. The oldest son talks about what he learned in the fields today, describing the work they did, asking questions about why certain techniques are used, his young mind trying to understand the logic behind agricultural practices that have been followed for generations. The person answers patiently, explaining that the irrigation channels must be kept clear or water won't flow properly in spring, that field boundaries must be maintained or disputes will arise with neighbors, that all the winter work that seems pointless is actually essential preparation for successful planting when warm weather returns. The 6-year-old daughter talks about her spinning practice, proudly showing the thread she helped create today, holding it up for everyone to admire, seeking validation and praise for her developing skills. The wife nods approvingly, commenting on the evenness of the thread, the consistent thickness, saying that with more practice, the girl will become skilled at this essential work, that she's learning well and will make a good wife someday when she's old enough to marry and join another family. The girl beams at this praise, her serious young face breaking into a rare smile, the recognition of her competence and value warming her more than the fire. The 3-year-old boy is mostly focused on eating, his small face intent on his bowl, but occasionally he makes observations about his day, something he saw, a game he played, fragments of the child's world that still has room for imagination and play, even in this harsh environment. The adults listen indulgently, amused by his childish perspective, cherishing these brief years before he too will be expected to contribute real labor, and childhood will end. The grandmother sits quietly, eating slowly, her old teeth making chewing difficult, but listening to everything, occasionally interjecting comments or memories, connecting the present moment to the past, reminding everyone that this life they're living is part of a continuity stretching back through generations, that their ancestors faced these same challenges and survived, that the family persists because each generation does its duty and passes life forward. Tonight is the second day of the lunar month, which has significance in the family's ritual calendar. After the meal is finished and the bowls are scraped clean and stacked for washing tomorrow, the grandmother prepares the twice-monthly offering to the ancestors, a ritual that's more elaborate than the simple morning incense. She takes a small amount of food, just a few spoonfuls of porridge, a small piece of the dried vegetables, and places it in a dish before the ancestor shrine, along with fresh incense and a tiny cup of water. She bows deeply 3 times, her old back protesting, and begins the traditional prayers. The entire family joins in this ritual, all of them bowing together while grandmother leads the prayers. The words are ancient, passed down through so many generations that their origins are lost. Some phrases in dialects so old that even grandmother doesn't fully understand their literal meanings. But the intent is clear: gratitude for the ancestors' protection, requests for their continued blessing, promises that the family will continue to honor them and maintain the traditions, that the chain connecting past to present to future will remain unbroken. The person bows deeply, thoughts turning to the father who died just 3 years ago, present in memory, though absent in body, whose tablet sits on the shrine receiving these offerings. The person remembers the father's teachings, his patience in showing how to repair tools, his wisdom about reading weather signs, his stories about previous generations, all that accumulated knowledge now residing in the person's mind and hands, to be passed forward to the oldest son, who will someday lead this family after the person joins the ancestors. This connection to ancestors is not abstract or metaphorical, but immediate and real. The ancestors are understood to be present, though invisible, watching over the family, capable of influencing events for good or ill, depending on how properly they're honored. Every success, a good harvest, a healthy birth, recovery from illness, is attributed partly to ancestral favor. Every misfortune, crop failure, injury, early death might be blamed on inadequate offerings or neglected rituals. This belief system provides both comfort and anxiety. Comfort in the sense that the family is never truly alone, that powerful helpers are always available if properly approached. Anxiety in the constant need to perform rituals correctly, to maintain favor, to avoid the displeasure that could bring catastrophe. After the ritual concludes, and the offerings are left in place for the ancestors to receive their spiritual essence, the physical food will be eaten by the family tomorrow. Nothing wasted, the family settles into the evening's leisure time. the brief period between work ending and sleep beginning, when there's nothing that must be done, just precious time to simply exist together. The grandmother tells a story, one of the traditional tales that have been passed down orally for generations, stories that carry moral lessons and cultural values while also providing entertainment. Tonight's story is about a poor farmer who found a magical seed, planted it despite his poverty, and watched it grow into a plant that reached all the way to heaven, its branches bearing fruits that could cure any illness, its leaves providing shelter from any storm. The farmer shared these gifts with his village, asking nothing in return, and the gods rewarded his generosity by making his family prosperous for generations. The children listen with wide eyes, the youngest already drowsy from the warmth and the full stomach, leaning against his mother, who holds him gently. The older children are still alert, asking questions. Was this real? Could such a seed still be found? What kind of fruit grew on the heavenly plant? Grandmother answers patiently, navigating between literal truth and metaphorical meaning, explaining that the story teaches important lessons about generosity and virtue, even if the details might be exaggerated or symbolic. These stories serve multiple functions in peasant life. They're entertainment in a world that offers few pleasures, a way to pass time in the long winter evenings when there's no light for work. They're education, teaching children about proper values and behavior through memorable narratives rather than abstract lectures. They're psychological escape, offering fantasies of magic and prosperity and justice that contrast sharply with the harsh reality of daily life. And their cultural transmission, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom and beliefs of countless generations, maintaining continuity even as individual lives come and go. The person listens to the story too, never tiring of these familiar tales, even after hearing them hundreds of times. There's comfort in repetition, in the known patterns of narrative, in the certainty that stories always follow their expected arcs. Virtue is rewarded, vice is punished, good ultimately triumphs, even if it suffers temporary setbacks. This moral order reflected in stories provides reassurance that the universe itself operates according to comprehensible principles, that suffering is not arbitrary, but serves purposes that might not be immediately apparent, but that ultimately make sense within a larger cosmic framework. After storytelling comes singing, old folk songs that everyone knows, simple melodies that have been sung in this region for centuries, passing from generation to generation without ever being written down. The wife starts a song about planting rice, her voice thin but clear, and others join in, their voices blending in rough harmony, creating music that's not sophisticated or beautiful by elite standards, but that expresses something real about the lives being lived here, about the connection to land and seasons and agricultural labor that defines peasant existence. The songs are about work and weather and love and loss, about the fundamental experiences that all humans share regardless of social class, rendered in simple language and memorable melodies that allow them to persist across time. Singing together creates a sense of unity and shared experience, reminds the family that they're not just individuals struggling alone, but part of something larger, part of a community and a tradition, and a way of life that transcends any single person's brief existence. As the evening progresses, the fire is allowed to burn lower, fuel being conserved because supplies must last until spring, when gathering becomes easier. The smoke continues rising through the hole in the roof, but also fills the house with a haze that makes eyes water. But that also creates a particular atmosphere, intimate and enclosed, separating this small, bright, warm space from the vast, cold darkness outside. The temperature inside drops as the fire diminishes, everyone instinctively moving closer together, drawn toward the remaining warmth like moths to flame. The youngest child has fallen asleep, his small body relaxed and heavy in his mother's arms, his face peaceful in the firelight. The mother carefully carries him to the sleeping platform, arranges him in his usual spot, covers him with his portion of the quilted padding, tucking it around him securely. The other children are showing signs of tiredness too, yawning, their movements becoming slower and less coordinated, their voices dropping to murmurs. The day's work has exhausted them as it exhausts everyone, and sleep approaches not as something that must be pursued, but as something that simply claims them, pulling them down into necessary rest. The person banks the fire carefully, covering coals with ash to slow their burning, ensuring that some will survive until morning, so the rekindling process will be easier. Then, the door covering is secured more thoroughly against the night cold, the windows checked to make sure their oiled paper coverings are intact. These small preparations for sleep have been performed countless times, are so automatic they require almost no conscious thought, just the body moving through familiar patterns while the mind already begins to shut down, already begins the transition from waking to sleeping. The family moves to the sleeping platform, each person finding their customary position in the arrangement that's been established through habit and practical necessity. The person lies down in the center, the wife on one side, the oldest son on the other, the daughters beyond him, the youngest child at the edge with grandmother, the whole family arranged like puzzle pieces that fit together to maximize warmth and safety. The quilted padding is shared, some underneath providing cushioning against the hard platform, some on top providing insulation against the cold air. Everyone nestled together under this common covering that represents one of the family's most valuable possessions. The platform is still warm from the day's accumulated heat, the bricks radiating stored thermal energy, creating a zone of comfort that makes sleep possible despite the cold. Without this heated sleeping platform, winter nights would be almost unbearable, survival questionable, especially for the very young and very old whose bodies struggle most with temperature regulation. The kang is a technology that seems simple, but that represents centuries of accumulated knowledge about heat transfer and thermal mass and practical engineering, allowing people to survive in climates that would otherwise be marginal for human habitation. Before sleep, the person's mind reviews the day that's ending, running through the work accomplished and the work still remaining, the constant mental accounting that farmers must maintain. The irrigation channel was cleared successfully. The dam received needed repairs. Tomorrow's work will include checking the other plots, perhaps starting to prepare tools for spring planting, even though that's still months away. The stored grain supply continues to decline, must be monitored carefully. Rationing might become necessary if the remaining amount looks insufficient to last until harvest. The oldest son's cough seems to have improved, which is a relief, but must be watched because winter illnesses can turn serious quickly, and there's no money for doctors or medicine. These worries are constant companions, never entirely absent even in sleep, where they often manifest as anxious dreams of failed harvests and empty storage bins and hungry children. The person has learned to live with this baseline anxiety, understanding that it's simply part of the human condition, at least for people of this class. That worry doesn't actually solve problems, but somehow feels necessary anyway. The mind's way of trying to maintain control over circumstances that are actually largely beyond human control. But fatigue is stronger than worry tonight. The day's hard physical labor claiming its reward of deep, exhausted sleep. The person's last conscious thoughts are simple sensations: the warmth of the kang beneath, the pressure of the wife's body on one side and the son's on the other, the sound of children's breathing already deep and regular, the grandmother's soft wheezing that serves as white noise, the sense that for this moment everyone is safe and warm and together, that tomorrow's challenges can be faced when they arrive, but don't need to be worried about right now. Consciousness fades gradually, the person drifting down through layers of awareness, thoughts becoming less coherent and more dreamlike, the boundary between waking and sleeping becoming blurred, and finally dissolving completely. The mind releases its grip on the external world and turns inward, processing the day's experiences, consolidating memories, performing the mysterious maintenance work that sleep allows, preparing the body and brain for another day of the same work, the same challenges, the endless cycle continuing. And now, dear traveler through time, let us step back from this intimate family scene and consider what we've witnessed. This family is one of millions of peasant families across Han Dynasty China, all living similar lives, all facing similar challenges, all sustained by similar rituals and traditions and family bonds. These are the people who form the foundation of Chinese civilization, whose labor produces the surplus that supports emperors and scholars and artists and soldiers, and all the specialized roles that we associate with advanced civilization. Yet the peasants themselves experience few of the benefits of that civilization directly, living and dying without leaving any historical trace except their contribution to the gene pool and the continuation of the agricultural system that has sustained China for millennia. The life we've witnessed today is hard by any measure, defined by poverty that goes far beyond not having luxuries to not having even basic comforts, defined by labor that's physically destructive and mentally numbing, defined by vulnerability to disasters, both natural and man-made, that could destroy the family in moments. A bad harvest, a serious illness, an injury that prevents work, a demand for extra taxes, a raid by bandits, a flood or drought. Any of these could quickly cascade from manageable problem to catastrophe, from difficult situation to starvation and death. The margin for error is essentially zero, the family constantly walking a tightrope with disaster waiting on both sides. Yet this hard life also contains elements that we've lost in our modern, comfortable existence. The family bonds are strong, forged by necessity and mutual dependence, everyone understanding that survival requires cooperation and that conflict could be fatal. The connection to ancestors provides a sense of continuity and meaning that transcends individual suffering, making each person feel part of something larger and more enduring than their own brief life. The rituals and stories maintain cultural identity and psychological stability in conditions that would otherwise feel unbearable, providing frameworks for understanding suffering and maintaining hope. And there's the peace that comes from genuine exhaustion meeting genuine rest, from hunger meeting food, however simple, from cold meeting warmth, however basic. Modern people, despite their comfort and security and abundance, often struggle with sleep, lying awake, worrying about problems that aren't actually immediate threats, their minds refusing to shut down even when their bodies are tired. But for this peasant family, sleep comes easily because the body has worked to its limits, and rest is not optional but necessary, not something to be achieved through effort, but something that simply claims you when the time comes. This is not to romanticize poverty or suggest that hardship is good, or that we should envy these peasants their difficult lives. Their suffering was real and often terrible. Their lives were short and painful. Many of their children died young. Hunger and cold and disease were constant threats. And given the choice, most of them would surely have preferred the comfort and security that modern people enjoy. But it is to recognize that even in poverty and hardship, humans find ways to create meaning and maintain dignity and experience moments of genuine peace and even happiness. That the capacity for resilience and endurance and finding beauty in small things is fundamental to human nature across all times and places. The rituals we witnessed, the ancestor offerings, the prayers, the storytelling, the songs, these are not primitive superstitions to be condescended to, but sophisticated cultural technologies for creating meaning and maintaining psychological health in difficult circumstances. The connection to ancestors provides a sense of purpose that makes individual suffering feel less arbitrary, part of a larger pattern, meaningful within a cosmic framework that extends beyond any single lifetime. The stories and songs maintain cultural identity and provide psychological escape from harsh reality, while also transmitting values and wisdom across generations. The family bonds create support systems that allow individuals to endure what they could not endure alone, pooling resources and sharing burdens in ways that increase everyone's chances of survival. Understanding this helps us appreciate our own advantages, while also recognizing what we might have lost. We have comfort and security and abundance that ancient peasants couldn't imagine, medical care that saves lives that would have been lost, technology that makes work easier and life longer, safety nets that prevent the kind of immediate catastrophic disaster that peasants constantly faced. But we've also lost some things: the strong family bonds forged by necessity, the sense of connection to ancestors and place, the deep satisfaction of rest after genuine exhaustion, the psychological frameworks that made suffering feel meaningful rather than arbitrary and pointless. As you drift toward your own sleep now, comfortable in your warm bed, safe in your secure home, with your full stomach and your medical care and your endless entertainment options and all the countless advantages of modern life, take a moment to feel gratitude for these things that most humans throughout most of history did not have. But also take a moment to honor those ancient peasants whose lives were so much harder than yours, who endured so much with so little complaint, who found ways to maintain humanity and dignity, and even moments of peace within circumstances that seem almost unbearable from our comfortable perspective. They were your ancestors, all of you reading this, because everyone alive today is descended from people who lived similar lives of agricultural labor and poverty, who succeeded at the fundamental task of surviving long enough to reproduce and raise children, who survived to reproduce in turn, passing life forward generation after generation through countless hardships, until eventually you arrived. Without their endurance, their resilience, their refusal to give up even when circumstances seemed hopeless, you would not exist. You owe them everything, though most of us never think about them, never acknowledge the debt, never recognize that our comfortable modern lives rest on foundations of suffering and struggle that extended across thousands of years. Sleep now, modern child of ancient peasants. Sleep knowing that most humans throughout most of history lived much more like that peasant family than like you, that the comfort you take for granted is a recent aberration, that the human default is something closer to poverty and struggle than to prosperity and ease. but also sleep knowing that those ancient peasants were not simply miserable victims, but full human beings who experienced joy and love and meaning despite their harsh conditions, who found ways to thrive psychologically even when barely surviving materially, who passed forward not just genes, but culture and wisdom and the accumulated knowledge of countless generations. Dream of millet fields stretching to the horizon, of small houses with smoke rising from thatched roofs, of families huddled together on heated sleeping platforms, of fires burning against the darkness, of rituals connecting past and present and future, of lives lived simply but fully, of poverty that doesn't prevent peace, of hardship that doesn't eliminate meaning. Dream of ancient China in the Han Dynasty, of millions of peasants whose names are forgotten, but whose labor built civilization, whose struggles made your existence possible, whose resilience inspires across the vast gulf of time and circumstance that separates their world from yours. Let their patience teach you patience, their endurance inspire your endurance, their acceptance show you how to live with circumstances you cannot change. Let their family bonds remind you of the importance of connection. Their rituals show you the power of meaning-making. Their stories demonstrate that narrative and culture can sustain people through almost any hardship. Let their simple peace at day's end, exhausted rest after hard work, hunger satisfied by simple food, cold relieved by basic warmth, family gathered together against darkness, show you what genuine contentment looks like, stripped of all the complications and anxieties that modern comfort paradoxically creates. Rest now deeply and completely. Release all the tension you've been carrying, all the worries that have been circling in your mind, all the resistance to sleep that keeps you trapped in wakefulness. Let yourself sink into the same kind of profound rest that claimed that peasant family 2,000 years ago. The rest that comes when the body has worked fully and can finally stop, when the mind has processed the day and can finally quiet, when consciousness can release its grip and allow the mysterious healing work of sleep to proceed. You are safe. You are warm. You are fed. You have a family or friends, or at least the possibility of human connection. You have advantages and opportunities that ancient peasants could barely dream of. But like them, you are fundamentally human, subject to the same needs and vulnerabilities, capable of the same resilience and meaning-making, connected to them across all that time by the simple fact of being alive, being conscious, being part of the great ongoing experiment of human existence on this planet. Good night, modern person. Good night, descendant of countless peasants. Good night, heir to all that suffering and all that endurance. Sleep well, dream of ancient lives simply lived, and wake grateful for what you have while also mindful of the struggles that most humans throughout history have faced. The foundation of hardship on which all our comfort rests. The ancestors who made us possible through their refusal to surrender even when surrender would have been easier than continuing. the family sleeps. 2,000 years flow between then and now like a river, carrying everything away, yet somehow preserving the essential things: family, meaning, resilience, the fundamental human capacity to endure. Sleep joins you to them across that gulf of time. Sleep, the universal human experience, the nightly surrender of consciousness that allows life to continue. Rest and restoration that makes tomorrow possible. Dream well, rest deeply, wake renewed. Good night.